getting those things in my boxing style.
It's to me that the referee was on the verge of warning you for grabbing the ropes.
I wasn't grabbing those, I was chicken fighting. My Wayne was behind my back. I was
Chicken.
How is Roy Jones Jr. able to throw 23 punches in 3.5 seconds? How can he see the punches of world champions, elite athletes with top speed and dodge them on pure reaction? Answer is that he was born with raw athleticism. In his prime, he went 49-1. His single loss was from a disqualification. He accidentally hit Montel Griffin when he was down, and Montel Griffin took that chance to get out of the fight. In the rematch, Roy Jones won that fight with a first-round KO. He was a world champion in 4 weight classes, from middleweight, super middleweight, lightweight, and heavyweight. That climb from middleweight at 160 pounds went to fighting a heavyweight, John Ruiz, who went into that fight at over 226 pounds. Roy Jones Jr. seems to have a very unorthodox style. He doesn't rely much on the jabs to set up his other punches, and he seems to get away with it because of his hand speed. He also has his hands down much of the time, but again, he seems to get away with it due to his reaction speed. Roy Jones Jr. is undoubtedly a skilled boxer. He has an amateur pedigree. He participated in the controversial 1988 Summer Olympics. Here he dominated all his competitors, and he would have won gold if it wasn't for the corrupt Korean. He illustrates the fundamentals of body head. He baits the body with a jab, does it again to establish the pattern, and finally, when the opponent is expecting the body, he finishes it with the signature left hook. Some gave him the nickname Captain Hook for obvious reasons. Roy Jones is a master of the fundamentals. Mastery of the fundamental rules in boxing is necessary in order to break the rules. A beginner or even a very good professional should always keep their hands up and use the jab to set up other punches. Roy Jones understands the scenarios where this isn't necessary. In fact, he's mastered more conceptual principles behind these rules. In the highest levels of boxing, you need to use the principles of distance and timing to set up advanced traps, feints, and adapt to what's most effective in that situation for that particular fighter. Timing. Roy Jones Jr.'s magnum opus is likely his dismantling of James Toney. James Toney is arguably one of the best technical fighters and equally gifted in terms of reflex. Roy Jones was arguably the underdog in this fight. He was moving up in weight, and James Toney was a counterpunching expert. Roy Jones Jr. made James Toney look like he didn't belong in there with him. James Toney, the Hall of Fame boxer. Here we see a quick 3-2 combo against Reggie Johnson. Observe how even after the punch, Roy Jones is in position for a proactive defense against Johnson's left hand. Roy Jones Jr. has a high boxing IQ and is technically sound, but he's changed his style in the pros, like many fighters do, to be more exciting, awkward, and unorthodox, and more reliant on his speed and reflexes. But in an era where fundamentals were king, Jones was a rule breaker. He would throw punches from angles that shouldn't have worked with timing that defied convention. His movements were jerky and unpredictable, and his rhythm was impossible to read. It's the signature Roy Jones Jr. style. It's true he could use his jab more, but why would he when every punch he throws lands because of his hand speed? He could have his hands up more to protect his arguably weak chin, but why would he when he can see all the punches coming and use his incredible footwork? There's a unique combination of reflexes, positional awareness, and hand speed, arguably all genetic traits, that somehow also adds to his ring IQ and intelligence. He thinks fast. This is an interesting part of athleticism. There's a lack of delay between reading the situation, reacting to the situation, and coming up with an appropriate physical response. There's a tiny fraction of a second in which Jones chooses the perfect response to counter his opponent and puts it to perfect use. His decision making is just all around quicker than his opponent's. This is what makes Roy Jones so special. He wasn't just a technical fighter. He wasn't just relying on athleticism. He was an artist. He used his athleticism as a canvas and his unorthodox methods as his brush strokes. Fights weren't just contests, they were performances. Whether he was taunting his opponents, dropping his hands, or throwing no-look punches, he infused entertainment into every bout. Another historical moment was his fight against John Ruiz. Roy Jones started as a middleweight and climbed all the way to heavyweight to get the heavyweight champion belt. It's unheard of for the power, speed, and reflexes to translate across 5 weight divisions. The only way to hone these gifts to a almost superhuman level is by training very hard outside of the ring. His father, Roy Jones Sr., pushed his son so hard to the point it was almost child abuse. Roy Jones Sr., a former boxer and Vietnam vet, was known for his uncompromising, almost militaristic approach to training. He demanded perfection and was relentless in pushing his son to excel. From a young age, Roy Jones Jr. endured grueling workouts and sparring sessions. Roy Sr. would pit his son against much older and more experienced opponents, forcing Jones Jr. to develop his skills under pressure. While it toughened him up for the unforgiving world of professional boxing, it also subjected him to unnecessary harm at a young age. Failure wasn't an option. In interviews, Roy Jones Jr. has expressed a mix of gratitude and pain when reflecting on his father's influence, recognizing the duality of their relationship. Without the borderline abusive training, Roy Jones Jr. probably wouldn't have reached legendary status. Now, on top of the genetic gifts and the absolutely grueling training, there might have been another factor that contributed to his athleticism. During his prime fighting years, the regulation around performance-enhancing drugs were just developing. In the 80s, the International Olympic Committee began testing for anabolic steroids, and many combat sports, including amateur boxing, followed suit. But professional boxing, although they did take note, had varied enforcement. In 1999, the establishment of the World Anti-Doping Agency marked a significant step in creating a standardized anti-doping rule. But in the 80s and 90s, everybody was on performance-enhancing drugs. Even today, with the most developed standards, it's safe to say that most professional athletes are on some performance-enhancing drugs that can skirt the testing system. But in the 80s and 90s, it wasn't as unethical, and these rules were just beginning to emerge. So everybody, to be competitive, had to be on these performance-enhancing drugs. At that time, when the standards weren't developed yet, it's almost noble to see these athletes sacrifice their bodies to make themselves the greatest versions of themselves for us. It's another reason why it's so difficult to compare boxers of the past to more modern boxers. We can compare in skill, but the athletic standards have changed. There's more advanced nutrition science and performance-enhancing drugs, illegal or not. Will we ever see another Roy Jones Jr.? Probably not. He's a unique combination of genetic gifts, and genetics plays a massive role in boxing. It's impossible to ignore how much of a fighter's potential is tied to what they were born with. He was also introduced to boxing very young and had an amateur pedigree that developed his fight IQ. And he had the discipline and commitment to stay focused on training, study fighters from the past, and evolve his style. Some people say it's a shame that Roy Jones Jr. fought so long after his prime. If he had just retired after his prime, he would have went down as possibly the greatest of all time. Age catches up with everyone, like all other athletes. As you get older, your speed decreases, your reflexes decrease, and with this, Roy Jones became increasingly vulnerable with his style of boxing. He couldn't evade punches or impose his will in the later years of his career. But it's not easy walking away from a sport that you gave your whole life to. It's not fair to expect that of Roy Jones Jr. Roy Jones Jr., born January 16, 1969 in Pensacola, Florida, is a legend. It's not uncontroversial to say that he's the greatest middleweight of all time. In my opinion, in his prime, he was the greatest boxer of all time. Roy Jones Jr.'s genetics, not just his physical gifts, but his mind, his father, that's what made him the greatest boxer in history. And he will forever be my favorite fighter.
Y'all must have forgot. When they stole my gold medal and sold career, let's look back at my whole career, cause y'all must have forgot.